Today, I'm going to be doing my first ever mix in FL Studio. I'm going to use FL Studio 2025, and since this is the first time I've ever done a track mix inside FL, I'm going to use the new Nuro Mix Templates. You can see we've got all these different templates which use X-Rack and Supernova, and I've got 3 different beats I want to mix. I've got modern hip hop, I've got a little bit more of an electronic, as well as a synthwave track. So let's get into it and see how it works. So the first one I'll do is the hip hop mix. And so I'll start with this hip hop mix template. And as soon as we pull it up, we can see we've got a lot already set up. Now, I've played around with FL in the past, but I've never actually done a full mix in it. So I understand where different things are and generally how it works, but forgive me if I'm a little slow. Drop it down in the comments if there's any key commands or shortcuts that I should know about. Now, in order to do this mix, I've already printed out all of the stems from the beat. So this is something that I would recommend everyone to do whenever you're producing a track. Go ahead and once you're happy with the production, print out all your stems and start a fresh session. It's just a little easier to come at it with fresh ears and a fresh perspective. That way we can just focus on how do we elevate this track and take it to the next level. So the way these templates are set up, you can see we've got all these different options for different kicks, different snares, top loops, hats, different 808s and basses, keys. And these templates are designed to be drag and drop. So we can literally take one of these kick stems, drop it on a kick track, and let's see what happens. So it's just a little fatter sounding, and that's thanks to this processing with X-Rack. You can see we're doing a little bit of tone shaping, a little bit of the max slider, a little bit of saturation, and it's just filling out that kick. But of course we have different options. Each one of these is a different processing chain. So let's listen to punchy kick, tight kick, hard kick. So instantly we're getting a punchier kick. It's got a much tighter mid-range, which is going to help it poke through if we want that. So basically we've got 4 different options for this kick. Each one has a really great sound. I think I'm probably going to have to hear it in more context before I decide exactly which one fits best, but I'll probably start with that fat kick. Let's drop this snare in. So 4 different sounding snares. The fat snare had a lot of body in the lows, but there's something about this reso snare where it just kind of pokes through a little bit more and hits a little bit harder, which I like. We also have this other snare track here. Let's see what this one does. Maybe this crisp snare. Yeah, I like it on crisp snare. It's a lot pokier in the high mids. Let's just see what the processing is doing on that one. So that makes a lot of sense. We're adding a little bit of punch with the transient here. We're adding a little bit of high end with this present mode, which is modeling kind of that Neve sound on the high end. And then we also have this nice saturation here, which is just adding a little bit of fatness right on the transient. All right, we got some more drums here. Let's drag this hat in. All right, so I think I'm running into my first thing here in FL that I need to be careful of, which is making sure that we're not just driving everything super hard into the master. And right now we have all the faders up here at 0, so we need to pull everything back to give us some more headroom. Now, generally what I would recommend is turn off all the processing on the master track and then just pull everything down until you have enough headroom. So that's giving us a lot more headroom. I feel a lot better about that. Although we are still peaking really close here to 0. So getting used to the meters in FL is just something, if you use FL, you probably already are used to them. But for me, I'm just being a little careful here. So now we've got 3 to 6 dB of headroom. We'll try it there for now. I'll also turn back on my bus processing. Now we've got this interesting track here, Creature SFX. Let's try it on one of these perk tracks. All right, so Perk 2 is definitely a bit more compressed. It's got a bit more mid-range in it, whereas Perk 1 is just a little bit smoother sounding, not as much compression here. So let's go ahead and with Perk 1. And as I'm doing this, I'm just gonna kind of balance things as I go. I like that. We also have just a standard SFX track, and we have a template here for it. All right, so one thing I'm noticing that I need to check is my buffer size. Yeah, I'm at very low buffer right now, 128. Just to make things run a little smoother, let's just bump this up. I don't think we have to go crazy, but maybe 1024 or something around there. All right, I like that. I think actually we could use a little more of this effects. Cool. All right, so we got most of the drums in. Oh, we have these synth drums. Let's see what this sounds like. I think this one we could put on one of these perk tracks as well. Now for this, since I might want to use this perk 1, I could probably just duplicate this track. And we don't need to clone the audio clips, but now it looks like we do have another thing here. Now, one thing to note is if you duplicate the tracks here, we got to make sure that the routing stays the same. So this might be one of those things where I'm not certain of the best way to do it in FL, but I can just manually, if I duplicate that, bring it back over here to the top drum submix, and we'll be good to go. Might also try the top loop. Yeah, I kind of like it on this top loop track. Let's see what this processing is doing. So it's lifting up the highs, it's adding a little bit of squeeze with the compression and this maximized multiband compression, which sounds really nice. Okay, perfect. Let's move on to some 808. So here, we're definitely gonna have to be careful with this 808 because it's a pretty important part of this particular beat. So instantly when we went from tight to big, we really hear the subs kick in. Everything sounds so much fuller in the low end. Open is basically like just sub and just top end. It sounds nice, but for a track like this, we want that 808 to fill up a lot of that low mid range as well. Now this one's pretty interesting, this extreme 808. Obviously we're getting a ton of tape saturation, but we're doing a lot of processing on this just to really mangle it. It's actually a pretty cool sound. We might even be able to do some like dual processing here. If I can copy this clip, maybe from big 808 onto extreme 808, and yes, we'll make it unique. So it might not always work out that way where you can blend tracks, but it actually sounds really cool on this particular track. All right, so we're getting into the synths. Let's see what happens here. A little more present there with the clean synth. Yeah, just a nice lift of the synth there. Probably tuck it in. Maybe we'll look at this alarm synth. All right, so this one needs to be just kind of an airy top layer. We don't really want this one to be too big. So actually this old radio setting sounds pretty good for this track. It just kind of pushes it back in the background. We're getting some modulation, thickening it up. We're adding a little bit of bandpass filtering here just to kind of make it sound a little bit more distant. So it sounds really good on this track. I like that. Now we've got one more synth here. The names for these synths are not as descriptive as I normally would make them, but it does kind of sound like how they're described. Yeah, so that one's pretty interesting. Let's see what this one's doing. So we've got a lot of compression on this one, which is probably what is working so well. We've got a lot of compression and multiband OTT, which is just kind of bringing up all the little details in the synth, but it's also containing it dynamically, so it's not sticking out and falling back in. It works pretty well in this style of synth. Let's see, we got another synth here. Yeah, so this one needs a little bit of high-end help. So I think this excited sample track is working pretty well for it. Getting a little bit more high-end there, but I'm going to tweak this one a little bit. And this is what's great about these templates is they're so easy to tweak. Just pull up the plugins and dial them in until it's perfect. Yeah, so I like what that sounds like there. Just a little bit more airy top end on it. And we have one more track, this piano track. So let's see what this one sounds like. This is kind of the main element of this beat. So I picked this motion sample. It just sounded kind of natural and good on there. We're getting a little bit of pitch drift, but then just tweaking it a little bit to kind of roll off some of the mud in the subs, and then also just a little bit of OTT to make it a little more exciting. So it's subtle moves at this point, and everything we've done has been relatively subtle, maybe with the exception of the 808. And that's just because at this point, that's what we need. We need a little subtle elevation to each element. And that's what the template just kind of helps with. You just drag things in. Let's hear what it sounds like before and after. So it's a night and day difference. The drums are hitting so much harder. The bass is fuller and bigger without stepping on any of the other elements. Everything just kind of locks into place and it just sounds so much better that way. But we haven't even looked at the parallel processing buses yet. This is probably my favorite part of these templates. We can simply pull these faders up here. They're already routed and just add some parallel processing. So let's take a look at these. So that one adds excitement in the high mids, but it does it in a way that doesn't sound harsh. So that one's adding a ton of punch to the kick and snare. It sounds really nice. So that one's kind of a subtle drive effect. It's adding some saturation, a lot of tape saturation. Sounds really nice. Let's play around with balancing these out. So it definitely adds that next level. It's a subtle difference with parallel processing like this, but it's really adding that punch and tightness and excitement that we need. Yeah, when you take it away, it just kind of sounds distant and hollow. So it's just about finding the right balance with these faders. All these processing chains are already set up within the template. Now we can also play around with some reverb and delay. All of that is set up here as well. Now on this type of track, I probably wouldn't do too much, but actually on some of these effects, like maybe this Perk 1 track, it might be kind of cool to tie this one up to a big atmospheric reverb. So let's try that one. And of course, this is going to use Supernova, so we've got a lot we can play around with here. I might like a little bit more delay, maybe a ping pong delay going through here. That's very cool on that track. I might even play around with these snares a little bit here, like this rezo snare. Could be cool going into like a room verb. Sometimes just giving it a little ambience can help make it sound a little bigger. So these rooms in Supernova sound very realistic already, but I'm just gonna try to make this one even shorter and tighter since we're gonna use it on drums. All right, let's listen one more time before and after all the processing on this track. So it instantly elevated this track and took it to the next level in terms of the mix. And all we did was drag some things on. We made a few minor tweaks to some levels and processing here and there, but for the most part, it was already mixed when we dragged the tracks in. Now I'm noticing a couple things I forgot to do in FL. One was set the tempo here. I hope I can just change it and it automatically lines up. Yep, seems like it did just fine. Now, one other thing that we can do is we can play around with these submixes. Now, these submixes don't have any processing on them by design. All the processing is happening in parallel. But these are great when you just want to kind of dial in a overall level. Like, let's say we want a little bit heavier drum mix for this particular track. We can do it really easily just by pulling the bass and instruments down. And that kind of opens up a hole if, we want to send this to an artist, we want them to be able to hear themselves on it. That might be the perfect mix for this track. Now, over on the master, this is the one thing that, even with these templates, I generally like to experiment with, is pulling up X-Rack on it and just seeing what happens if we dial it in a little bit more. We can play around with the tone, the EQ. We can even add some more multiband dynamics. So this sub versus low slider are really helpful, especially in this instance on the master. Like, we want a big fat sub, but we don't necessarily want a ton of extra muddy low end. So when we're doing that, I'm actually going to leave the low end slider alone and just bring up the sub. And you're going to hear it just kind of, especially if you're listening to it with a sub, you're going to hear just it fill up in the low end without sounding muddy. So pretty amazing what the master processing is doing already. Now, of course, we can use any limiter we want. I've just got the stock limiter here. It sounds good. I can probably push into it if I need more level. So we're getting a little bit of pumping. I probably wouldn't push it that hard. One thing that is a little tricky, one thing that I'm noticing, is just knowing exactly where your levels are. In the DAWs I normally work in, I have a very good understanding of their meters and what generally is going to be loud versus not loud enough. Here I'm still learning the FL meters. It does look like generally we're kind of in this top range here. What I would look for generally is like, where does the RMS land versus the peak? So the peak is landing right below 0. That's because we have this fruity limiter on it. But, where's the RMS landing? It looks to me like it's landing somewhere between 0 and 6, which is going to be pretty loud. Generally, I would look for between maybe 3 and 9 on that RMS. So obviously, I'll have to check this one more carefully since I'm still learning the meters, but generally, I think that would be a pretty good starting point. So we mixed this track in a few minutes. Obviously, I was experimenting and talking through it, but probably could have dropped these stems in 6 minutes and gotten a great starting point from there. All right, so this next track is kind of a synthwave retro feel. So probably gonna open up this synthwave template and let's see how it goes. So right off the bat, we can see this one has all different processing set up. We've got all different types of tracks specific to this genre. And we've also got 3 different parallel processing chains, VHS, warmth, and crush. So we'll play around with those. So for this particular production, I used a full drum loop. There wasn't separate kick and snare, just how the samples worked out for this one. So I'm probably gonna use one of these full kit template tracks here. And this time I'm gonna set the BPM correctly. It's 100. So I just drag this down here. All right, very cool. Let's listen to the difference here. So full kit lifter is definitely a more exciting type of processing. We're adding a little bit of sizzle on the high end. We're compressing it, adding some multiband, OTT. So it's definitely a more exciting sound, but the smoother track actually feels a lot smoother and warmer and fuller for this particular style. And so I'm probably gonna go with that one for now. Of course, we might change our mind as we add more in there. We can always just flip them around. We've got some top loops here. Let's see what these sound like. I'm just getting a little bit more detail out of the lifter on the top loop lifter, just a little bit better sounding on this track. Yeah, so Smooth Hats is doing some interesting stuff, but I think the top loop smoother is probably the best bet here. Just to hear what it sounds like, let's hear it on the top loop lifter. Yeah, so definitely the top loop smoother is fuller and rounder for this particular track. I like that one. We have some of these perk fills here. Let's see what this sounds like. Yeah, so this tapey perk is just a big, fat, round, warm tape sound. We're getting a little tape saturation, a little boost in the low end, and it just sounds really full. We also have this more standard perk here. So that one works really nicely. I do want to play around with it on a hat track. It's kind of a hat sound almost, but it's a lot duller, obviously. Yeah, something about this clean hat track, it just kind of removes some of the mud and it makes it a little crisper sounding, which I like. Okay, let's get into the bass. Now the bass on this one is going to be interesting. I think this bass is pretty big sounding. It needs to be at least. So let's see what these do to it. Big bass track just sounds so powerful. I really like how that fits, but this is also just kind of the pre-chorus bass. It needs to blend well with the other bass, so I'm going to drag that one in as well. So with bass, part of the trick we need to worry about is matching the level of the bass from one section to another. We don't want this verse to come in and just the subs to start blaring. And then when we get to the big section of the track, there's no sub information. And so it sounds like the bass is smaller. So a lot of times I'll try to balance that out over a section like this where it goes from one to the other. That's a pretty good balance, I think, for right now. Let's add some of these keys in here. We got these retro electric pianos. Yeah, so these ones we can just do pretty clean. I like that clean track there. Let's see what this other one sounds like. Now we have a ton of these other synth tracks here. Let's see what these sound like. Yeah, that one sounds nice. It's just kind of like a one section there for it. Wow, that one sounds really cool. It's kind of a high frequency shimmer sound. Sounds really good on smooth track there. Hype synth is a little bit too compressed for this particular track. It just sounded a little fake, whereas airy synth is bright without being overly smashed. So here's a track where we can actually get away with some of that smashed effect. We're getting a lot of OTT here. I just want to pull out some more of the lows though, and just so it's a really airy texture just on the top. Yeah, it's just like barely there. You can almost kind of hear it. Let's see what these guitar textures are sounding like here. Now this one I already know could use some delay. Maybe this dotted eighth delay here. We'll send it here. Very cool sounding. So this delay is pretty interesting. It's actually a micro shifter algorithm. So we're getting that kind of wide stereo effect without actually being, you know, ping pong or anything like that. So just listen to the delay taps here. You hear how it's very wide sounding. That's thanks to this micro shifter algorithm. Sounds really cool in this genre. Let's see what these pads are doing here. We might have to start duplicating some tracks. Let's try this. Yeah, those pads sound really nice. Now the point is not necessarily to only, you know, use one of each of these tracks. Of course we can duplicate things. It's just kind of working out that way right now, but I'm probably, especially for this main synth, because I'm kind of leaning towards the smooth synths or airy synths. So let me just actually make a copy of this one right now And let's pull this main synth in. And we got to remember to play around with the routing here. So we got to send this to our instrument and we got to take it out of the master since we duplicated it. So this particular track is a tough one, this lead synth. It's got kind of a brittle high end to it, just naturally the synth patch sounds that way. And so that's why I kind of wanted to play with this smooth one as well. Let's see how it sounds here. Yeah, you hear how much fuller it sounds and just more natural on this smooth track. The airy one was just a little bit too brittle. I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this extra one that we have. And here's something I'm not sure of, so we're gonna hit OK and hope for the best, and it looks like everything worked out. Okay, so I'm happy about that, but I do think we need a little bit of verb on this one. So I'm gonna route this one to maybe the hall verb. Yeah, we're getting that nice nostalgic 80s reverb sound. We're using Supernova here for the hall verb, and we've got the gold hall, which is one of my favorites. It's a very realistic sounding hall reverb, but we're using a very long time. And so that's giving us that kind of washed out reverb sound. Sounds really cool. Okay, I think there's a couple tracks that I skipped. I think this analogy track, let's see what this one sounds like. All right, so this is kind of a pad, and we actually need to kind of clean it up a little bit, I think. It has a tendency to get a little muddy. I'm going to try some of these sample tracks. So you hear how that just kind of instantly cleans it up. When we went back to the full track here, the full synths, it's a little bit less hyped, but it's also quite a bit boomier in the low mids. And sample squeeze is just nice sounding. It's brightening it up in the right way. It's tightening up the low mids. It sounds a lot nicer. Let's see what this one sounds like. I kind of remember this one needed to be tamed a bit. It was a little bit unruly in the production mix. So when we went on that sample hype track, you heard what I meant. Pretty bright sounding, and it just kind of sticks out a little bit. So we really need to smooth and warm this one up. I might try these keys tracks up here. Oh yeah, that's way better already. It could probably use a little bit of reverb as well, maybe a plate verb. Yeah, and what I love about that is it's taking a step back. So we're not interfering with the main melody, which was my biggest concern with this track, is that it was kind of stepping on the melody when it's supposed to be more of a call and response. And so by pushing it back a little bit in the mix with the right plate reverb here, we're using the plate algorithm in Supernova. It's just kind of pushing it one step back. Sounds a lot better and a little bit more playful off the melody now instead of stepping on its toes. All right, I love how this is feeling so far. Let's play around with some of this parallel processing. That is such a cool one, the VHS. It just kind of brings that nostalgic, lo-fi kind of sound that you would get from a VHS player, you know? Warmth adds a lot of warmth in the low mids there. I like that. And Crush gives us that kind of like after you print it to tape and play it 100 times and you're just getting that kind of slightly degraded transient, slightly, smashed dynamic range. It just sounds pleasant, especially in this genre. So it's really fat sounding, really nice there. I like what that's doing to it. Let's listen to all of the processing before and after on this template. we're going from this thin kind of digital sounding track to extremely warm and full. And actually I think we probably could bring back a little bit of presence and pull the lows down just a little bit, especially in the mix bus here. Let's just play around with this processing a bit. Now, part of the reason we're getting that massive difference is that all of these tracks are going through the X-Rack and Supernova algorithms, which is adding all of that analog color, especially on transients and just the dynamics of each track in order to produce this ultra warm sound. Let's just take one more listen before and after. So I love this as a starting point on this track. Of course, I probably am going to go back through and listen, probably tweak some levels, adjust some panning, and probably even play around with the processing a little bit. Other than that, I mean, this is a great starting point that we got to within, probably 5 or 10 minutes. We just dragged in all the stems and we've got a perfect starting point for this mix all ready to go. All right, so I got one more mix that I want to set up here, and this one is more of an electronic track. So I'm probably going to let's go to these templates, and let's go with this electronic mix template. And I've set my tempo. Let's drag some tracks in. So I can tell this one, I remember when I was working on the production, it's definitely going to be pretty loud. So I'm just going to start by pulling everything down. I know I'm going to need headroom on this one. That might be a little extreme, but that's okay. We can pull it up if we need to. I'll try out some of these kicks, but it's really going to depend on the rest of the drums as well. So let's pull in some of these claps. We have a snare build, and I'm just going to try dragging a bunch of these in where I kind of think they might work, and then we'll audition some different ones. Got a bunch of top loops here. All right, let's go ahead and listen to some of these sections. Okay, I'm liking how that sounds on the claps. I do think I pulled the tracks down a little bit too much. Just something I need to get used to in FL here. It's probably a little better. So the kick is going to kind of depend on the bass as well, in this, especially in this genre. I'm probably going to leave it on big kick. It sounds the nicest and biggest right now. So I actually like this top loop track on the clean hats. It just has the most excitement in the highs without being harsh. The smash top loop is a little bit too smashed, I think, for that one. But it works perfectly on this track. So this is kind of a ride that needs to kind of pump a little bit more. That sounds great. Yeah, same thing here. Crush Perk sounds really good on this track. It brings out some of those sizzly highs that we need. We also have an SFX track. I like how smooth the scrolling is. That's something that's nice in FL here so far. Okay, now let's bring in some of these basses. The big sub bass track sounds great on this one. The Reese bass, let's see. So this is one where there's two basses layered, which generally is not a very easy thing to work with on a mix. So I'm probably going to put this one maybe on clean sub bass and see if maybe we have to roll off some more of the lows. So it's nice, it's kind of filling out some of those low mids a little bit more. It does add a little bit, but without getting muddy. So I have this ARP bass. Let's see what this one does. Yeah, so I like what the fat synth bass does on this one. It just kind of rounds it out, keeps it open. We're obviously gonna have a bunch of synths on top, so we need to keep some space for those. Let's start pulling some of those synths in. So this is a perfect one for some big atmospheric reverb. Maybe even some delay, let's see. So that sounds really cool, and we're getting that with the dome effect and a little bit of this tape delay. It just sounds really cool with Supernova on that track. Let's play around with the analog pluck. Yeah, so this one needs to be a little brighter. That sounds nice there. Let's pull in some of these other harps. So something about this Fat Keys track just kind of brings out a little bit of the top end of this synth, and it just really locks into place. Okay, we've got main ARP. Let's see what this one sounds like. So this is one where I think I'm going to want to duplicate this one. And let's see if we can even make this more extreme. I'm just going to add some more OTT to this track. That sounds nice. We also have a couple more synths here. This dist synth. I like how that sounds. I think this lead synth needs to be even more exciting. This will be probably a case where I tweak the preset here. The hype synth, it gets us a lot of the way there, but I think we just, for this one, we need a little more high end. All right, so let's go back to the kick. Now that we're hearing the whole track, I'd like to see what other kicks sound like. So the sub kick is interesting. It's definitely a more tucked in sound, whereas big kick is going to be more in your face. So I like how that sounds. I'm wondering if this clap is maybe a little too dark. It could probably stick out a bit more with this airy track. And now I want to play around with the mix bus here. We could probably add a little bit of level. So just a few minor tweaks here as I'm listening back through it, but let's just hear what the template's doing to the track. So much fuller and so much bigger. I really like the direction that it's taking us in. But of course we can play around with the parallel processing as well. I like to think of the parallel processing as kind of like the final bit of focus, the sharpness that we can add to the track. It just kind of tucks everything in, glues it together, and brings out all the transients and the punch and the warmth. So let's listen before and after, now that we've dialed those in, everything that we've done so far with this template. So instantly we're getting an elevated, much more glued together, much fatter sounding mix. And again, all we did was a few minor tweaks. We dragged the tracks in, we tried out, auditioned different versions, and now we've got an amazing starting point to finish this mix. Of course, I'll probably come back and tweak some things with fresh ears, but for the most part, we've got a great mix. I'd say it's 85–90% done, and it's just now going to be about finding those little areas where we can make it slightly better by adding a little more low end or taking some away, things like that. So I've definitely got a lot to learn about FL, but these templates have made it a lot easier to just start getting great sounding tracks right away. Dragging things in, rebalancing, playing around with little tweaks here and there, and we've got some amazing starting points for these tracks. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, leave us a comment, and subscribe for more tutorials like this. And if you get a chance to try out the new Nuro Mix Templates, you can pick up a bundle with Supernova, X-Rack, or X-Rack Pro, and the new mix templates. There's 7 in total. There's a quick start video to kind of walk you through everything you need to know about them. And then you get all of these different templates. There's hundreds of different starting points and presets in all of these. So have fun experimenting and mixing with them. They're going to give you some great starting points right off the bat. As always, happy mixing.